19 black rappers who are actually psychopaths and you never knew. Behind the platinum records, sold out arenas, and fearless public images, some of hip-hop's biggest names were fighting battles their fans could barely see. Kid Cudi, Kanye West, DMX, Scarface, Big Sean, and other black rap stars have spoken about struggles involving depression, anxiety, trauma, addiction, or mental health, proving that fame and fortune cannot guarantee peace of mind. Some sought therapy, some poured their darkest emotions into music, and others endured devastating personal consequences. But which stories have been misunderstood or exaggerated over the years? Today, we separate documented struggles from rumors. Before we begin, subscribe to Golden Black Legends, hit the like button, and comment below which rapper story surprised you the most. Kid Cudi. For millions of listeners, Kid Cudi became the voice people turned to when loneliness felt impossible to explain. Born Scott Mescudi, the Cleveland rapper broke through with Day and Night before releasing Man on the Moon, The End of Day in 2009. Instead of hiding behind the traditional image of an emotionally invincible rapper, Cudi built much of his music around isolation, anxiety, addiction, depression, and the exhausting search for peace. That vulnerability eventually became far more than an artistic theme. Behind his growing fame, Cudi was experiencing serious personal struggles. He has spoken publicly about depression, substance use, and periods when suicidal thoughts entered his life. The original transcript correctly identifies 2016 as a crucial turning point, although its dramatic language exaggerates some details. In October of that year, Cudi published an emotional Facebook statement revealing that he had checked himself into treatment for depression and suicidal urges. He wrote that he was not at peace and wanted professional help. That admission was striking within a genre historically associated with toughness. Rather than pretending everything was fine, Cudi allowed millions of people to see that commercial success could coexist with profound emotional pain. Over time, his openness became an important part of his cultural influence. Artists, including Travis Scott, have acknowledged his impact, while Cudi continued creating music, acting, and exploring other artistic projects. His recovery story should not be simplified into the claim that every struggle disappeared permanently. Mental health rarely follows such a neat storyline. What makes Cudi's journey powerful is something more realistic. He reached a point where hiding the pain was no longer sustainable and chose to seek help. For listeners who had spent years finding comfort in his music, seeing the artist finally fight for himself gave those songs an entirely deeper meaning. Kanye West, y'all. Few artists have exposed their inner turmoil as publicly as Kanye West, now known as Ye. For years, he was celebrated as the visionary behind albums such as The College Dropout, Graduation, and My Beautiful, Dark Twisted Fantasy. Yet behind the extraordinary creative ambition, Ye has also publicly discussed serious struggles involving his mental health. A major turning point came in November 2016 when the remainder of his St. Pablo tour was cancelled and he was hospitalized in Los Angeles. In 2018, Ye publicly said he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, even placing the words, "I hate being bipolar, it's awesome" on the cover of Ye. He subsequently described the condition as a superpower, while also speaking about his complicated relationship with psychiatric medication. The source transcript connects Ye's diagnosis with periods of erratic public behavior, paranoia, and his controversial 2020 presidential campaign. However, accuracy requires an important boundary. Controversial behavior cannot automatically be attributed to bipolar disorder, nor should hateful statements be excused as unavoidable symptoms of mental illness. That distinction became particularly important after Ye's anti-Semitic remarks in 2022 resulted in major companies, including Adidas, ending partnerships with him. Those business consequences were real, but reducing every controversy to a psychiatric diagnosis would be both medically unsupported and unfair to millions living with bipolar disorder. Ye's story therefore remains complicated. His musical influence is undeniable, his diagnosis has been publicly discussed, and his struggles have unfolded under extraordinary scrutiny. But perhaps the most revealing lesson is that genius and mental illness should never be romanticized as inseparable. Ye's journey demonstrates how fame can amplify an already difficult personal struggle and why understanding a diagnosis does not mean removing personal responsibility. Big Sean. At the height of success, Big Sean discovered something that chart positions and money could not provide peace of mind. Born Sean Anderson and raised in Detroit, he rose from performing for Kanye West to becoming a major rapper in his own right, releasing successful projects, including Finally Famous, Dark Sky Paradise and Detroit 2. Yet eventually, the pressure behind that ascent became impossible for him to ignore. Around his 30th birthday in 2018, Sean stepped away and began confronting his emotional condition more seriously. He later spoke publicly about experiencing anxiety and depression and explained that he started therapy after realizing something inside him needed attention. This makes Sean a stronger addition to the revised list than rappers whose supposed diagnoses were inferred primarily from lyrics. His story comes substantially from his own descriptions of his mental health journey rather than an outsider attempting to diagnose him. Therapy forced him to examine questions that celebrity had not answered. Who was Sean Anderson without Big Sean? What relationships actually made him happy? Was he pursuing success because he genuinely wanted it, or because achievement had become an expectation? Those questions became part of a larger personal reset. Sean discussed taking time for himself, meditation therapy, and learning to understand emotions he had previously suppressed. When he returned creatively, his perspective on wellness had become noticeably more prominent. The significance of his story lies precisely in its lack of sensationalism. There does not need to be a dramatic public breakdown for psychological suffering to be real. For an industry that historically rewarded men for appearing emotionally invulnerable, Big Sean offered another message. Sometimes strength means admitting that success has not made you happy and being willing to ask someone for help before the darkness becomes unbearable. DMX Earl Simmons. The growl was unmistakable. DMX-born Earl Simmons could sound ferocious enough to shake an arena, yet some of his most unforgettable moments came when that intimidating voice suddenly softened into prayer. Behind the platinum albums and explosive performances stood a man who repeatedly spoke about trauma, addiction, and conflicting parts of himself. DMX endured an extraordinarily difficult childhood involving instability, violence, and time in institutional settings. He also described a traumatic episode in which an older person he trusted introduced him to crack cocaine when he was only 14, an experience he later recalled with visible emotion. The transcript connects those wounds to bipolar disorder and interprets DMX's dark character Damien as though it were literally a hallucinated voice. That goes too far. DMX did publicly discuss having been diagnosed with bipolar disorder in a 2011 interview. But artistic characters and lyrics should not automatically be treated as psychiatric symptoms. His battle with substance dependence, however, was very real and lasted for decades. Arrests, rehabilitation attempts, career disruptions, and personal turmoil repeatedly interrupted extraordinary professional achievements. DMX became the first artist whose first 5 studio albums debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, demonstrating just how enormous his success had become. In April 2021, DMX suffered a catastrophic medical emergency and remained hospitalized in critical condition. He died on April 9, 2021, at age 50. His story deserves more than the stereotype of a troubled rapper. Earl Simmons spent much of his life searching for faith and stability while carrying wounds that fame could never erase. DMX sounded fearless on record, but his willingness to reveal pain may ultimately be one of the bravest parts of the legacy he left behind. G. Herbo. For G. Herbo, trauma was not an abstract subject discovered after fame. Growing up on Chicago's East Side, Herbert Wright III experienced an environment where violence and losing people close to him became disturbingly familiar. Years later, when success finally arrived, the memories did not simply disappear with money. Herbo has spoken openly about struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder and seeking therapy. His 2020 album, PTSD, transformed those experiences into one of the clearest artistic statements of his career. Its cover depicted him holding an American flag altered to represent France he had lost, turning personal grief into a visual reminder of the human cost surrounding street violence. The transcript correctly connects Herbo's psychological struggles to repeated exposure to violence while growing up. Where it becomes too dramatic is in presenting every symptom as an established medical fact. Herbo's own testimony about trauma and therapy provides a stronger foundation than speculation. His response also extended beyond music. In 2020, he launched the Swervin' Through Stress initiative designed to encourage young people, particularly those from communities affected by violence, to take mental wellness seriously and gain access to supportive resources. That decision gave his story broader significance. Hip-hop had long provided language for describing dangerous neighborhoods, but Herbo pushed the conversation toward what surviving those environments can do psychologically. His journey challenges an old assumption: surviving violence does not necessarily mean escaping its consequences. Herbo made it out of circumstances that claimed people around him, yet he discovered that survival required more than staying alive. It also meant confronting what those experiences had left inside him, and showing younger black men that seeking therapy does not make them weak. Scarface bred Terrence Jordan. Long before conversations about depression became common in hip-hop, Scarface was putting frighteningly dark emotions onto records. Born-bred Terrence Jordan, the Houston rapper, became a defining voice of the Ghetto Boys and later one of Southern rap's most respected solo artists. His storytelling could feel cinematic, but behind that darkness were personal struggles he would eventually discuss openly. Scarface has spoken about experiencing severe depression from a young age and attempting suicide as a teenager. He has also described spending time in a psychiatric hospital. Those experiences give his inclusion in this list considerably stronger grounding than simply analyzing violent or disturbing lyrics. The original transcript describes him as having manic depression and then uses the Ghetto Boys' classic mind playing tricks on me as evidence of schizophrenia-like hallucinations. That interpretation needs restraint. A song can draw from genuine emotions without functioning as a medical record, and lyrics alone cannot establish schizophrenia. What is undeniable is Scarface's willingness to explore paranoia, despair, isolation, and mortality at a time when mainstream audiences rarely associated rap with vulnerable conversations about mental health. His honesty helped make records such as The Diary emotionally powerful beyond their street narratives. His later life brought serious physical challenges as well. After becoming dangerously ill with COVID-19 in 2020, Scarface experienced kidney failure. In 2021, his son, Chris Jordan, donated a kidney to him, giving the rapper another extraordinary chance at life. Scarface survived both psychological darkness and devastating physical illness, and perhaps that longevity gives his music an even deeper meaning today. The young man who once struggled to imagine a future lived long enough to become an elder statesman of Southern hip-hop, still here to explain what surviving the darkness actually cost him. Wale. For years, Wale built his reputation around sharp lyricism, ambition, and an ability to move between introspective rap and mainstream hits. Born Olubowale Victor Akintaimihin, the Washington, D.C. area artist achieved the kind of career many aspiring rappers dream about. Yet behind records, tours, and industry recognition, Wale has spoken openly about periods of emotional difficulty that success did not automatically erase. Depression became one of the subjects he was willing to address publicly. In interviews, Wale has discussed struggling with insecurity, sadness, and the psychological pressure created by constantly measuring himself against other successful artists. Criticism could affect him deeply, particularly during an era when social media placed artists under non-stop public judgment. That makes Wale a more defensible addition to this revised list than figures whose mental health conditions have largely been inferred from lyrics. His own comments provide the foundation. Still, his experiences should not be exaggerated into diagnoses or symptoms he has never personally confirmed. Music frequently became an outlet. Across projects such as the album About Nothing and later releases, listeners heard an artist examining relationships, recognition, disappointment, and his complicated relationship with fame. His story also challenges the assumption that depression must always look dramatic. Someone can remain productive, perform before thousands, earn successful records, and still struggle privately. Over time, Whale has appeared increasingly willing to protect his peace rather than chase every argument surrounding his career. That evolution may be one of the most important parts of his story. Whale spent years wanting the world to recognize his value as an artist. Eventually, the more difficult battle became learning not to let the world's approval determine his value as a person. Chris Calico. Behind Chris Calico's powerful voice and animated stage presence lies one of hip-hop's most candid stories about living with mental health challenges. Born Samuel William Christopher Watson IV, the Kansas City artist became closely associated with Tech N9 and strange music, developing an unusual musical identity that blended rapid-fire rap, soul, rock, and melodic vocals. But the energy audiences saw on stage concealed painful experiences. Chris has publicly discussed living with bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety, making him one of the stronger factual choices from the original transcript. The source badly misspells his name as Chris Co and Chris Kiko, but correctly centers his section on struggles he has addressed through his music. His emotional difficulties also intersected with another challenge. Chris has vitiligo, a condition that causes areas of skin to lose pigmentation. He has spoken about how being visibly different affected his confidence, particularly while growing up. Rather than separating those experiences from his art, Chris placed them directly inside it. Projects including vitiligo and bipolar turned intensely personal subjects into music, while songs dealing with anxiety and depression allowed listeners to encounter vulnerabilities hidden behind his booming performances. There were periods when his psychological struggles became extremely serious, including suicidal thoughts that he later discussed publicly. Those experiences should be described through his own testimony rather than sensationalized as the transcript's madness. After spending many years with strange music, Chris entered a new professional chapter and established Earhouse, giving himself greater control over his creative direction. His survival carries particular weight because he refused to pretend that strength meant silence. Chris Calico turned conditions that once made him feel isolated into subjects connecting him with strangers and proved that the voice shaking an auditorium could belong to someone fighting quietly just to remain standing. Gucci Mane. Few transformations in modern hip-hop have been as visible as that of Gucci Mane. Born Redrick Davis, the Atlanta rapper helped shape trap music while simultaneously experiencing years marked by arrest, drug use, incarceration, and increasingly unpredictable public behavior. For a long time, chaos seemed almost inseparable from the Gucci Mane story. But explaining that period requires caution. Gucci has spoken about substance use and the psychological instability surrounding some of his darkest years, yet it would be irresponsible to diagnose every disturbing action from a distance. His experiences involved a complicated combination of addiction environment, legal problems, personal decisions, and mental well-being. A major turning point came during his federal imprisonment beginning in 2013. When Gucci emerged from custody in 2016, audiences immediately noticed substantial changes. He had lost significant weight, embraced sobriety and fitness, and appeared determined to restructure both his personal life and career. His 2017 memoir, The Autobiography of Gucci Mane, provided considerably more context about the turmoil behind his public image. Rather than presenting his past simply as entertaining celebrity madness, Gucci described addiction, paranoia, violence, imprisonment, and the consequences of choices that repeatedly threatened his future. The transformation did not erase his history. Instead, it gave that history a different ending. Professionally, Gucci returned to extraordinary productivity and remained influential to younger generations of Atlanta rappers. Personally, his marriage to Keisha Kaoir and growing family became visible symbols of a more structured chapter. His inclusion here therefore should not rest on an unsupported psychiatric label. The more compelling story is documented change. Gucci Mane once appeared trapped in a cycle that could easily have ended his life or career. His later years demonstrated something audiences did not expect. Sometimes the most dramatic act of rebellion is simply surviving long enough to become a different man. Joe Budden. Before millions knew Joe Budden as an outspoken broadcaster and podcaster, listeners knew him as a rapper whose music often ventured into uncomfortable emotional territory. His 2003 hit Pump It Up brought mainstream recognition, but deeper inside his catalog, particularly the Mood Music series, Budden repeatedly explored depression, addiction, damaged relationships, and thoughts that were considerably darker than his public confidence suggested. Those themes were not merely characters invented for records. Budden has spoken publicly about experiencing depression and suicidal thoughts, as well as a troubled history with substance use. The original transcript appropriately recognizes depression as central to his story, although it sensationalizes his experiences and presents some claims with more medical certainty than the available material supports. Budden has described particularly dangerous periods in which he did not want to continue living. He has also discussed abusing PCP, commonly known as angel dust, during earlier chapters of his life. Eventually, sobriety and greater self-awareness became essential parts of moving forward. His career then underwent an unusual reinvention. After releases as a solo rapper and membership in the supergroup Slaughterhouse, Budden retired from recording and increasingly concentrated on broadcasting. The Joe Budden podcast subsequently turned him into one of hip-hop media's most recognizable and frequently controversial voices. That outspoken personality can sometimes overshadow the experiences underneath it. His survival story is neither clean nor uncomplicated, and his public behavior should not automatically be explained through mental health. What remains important is his willingness to acknowledge periods when depression became dangerous. Joe Budden spent years translating internal turmoil into music. Eventually, he found another microphone, and instead of using it only to rap about surviving, he lived long enough to discuss what survival actually required. Danny Brown. To audiences encountering Danny Brown for the first time, his piercing voice, frantic delivery, unconventional appearance, and wild humor could seem almost cartoonishly energetic. But behind that deliberately eccentric persona stood an artist whose music increasingly documented addiction, anxiety, depression, and the exhausting consequences of using substances to escape emotional pain. Growing up in Detroit, Brown experienced an environment shaped by instability and exposure to drugs. As his career developed, substance use became deeply intertwined with touring and creativity. His critically acclaimed 2016 album, Atrocity Exhibition, presented that darkness with uncomfortable intensity, exploring isolation, compulsive behavior, and the destructive cycle surrounding addiction. The source transcript connects Brown with depression, anxiety, trauma, cocaine, and alcohol use. Some diagnostic language in that account is too definitive without direct medical documentation. But Brown himself has openly discussed depression, drug problems, rehabilitation, and the emotional toll of his lifestyle. By 2023, he recognized that the cycle had become unsustainable and entered rehab. When he later discussed treatment and sobriety, the difference was striking. Brown described gaining clarity after years in which drugs and alcohol had become normalized parts of his existence. That recovery period coincided with another creative chapter, including the release of Quaranta. The record sounded reflective rather than simply chaotic, as though the man behind the famous laugh was finally examining what decades of survival had cost him. Danny Brown's story matters because his eccentricity should never be mistaken for illness. Personality is not a diagnosis. The real struggle was happening beneath the performance. An artist repeatedly trying to outrun pain through substances until he finally chose the far more difficult path, facing life without them. Charles Hamilton. At the end of the 2000s, Charles Hamilton looked like one of hip-hop's most promising new talents. The Harlem rapper, producer, and multi-instrumentalist built an enormous online following through a relentless stream of mixtapes and self-produced music. His momentum earned him a place on XXL's 2009 freshman cover, while Brooklyn Girls appeared positioned to push him toward mainstream recognition. Then, almost as quickly as his career accelerated, his personal life began unraveling in public. Hamilton has spoken openly about serious mental health struggles, including bipolar disorder, and about periods of psychiatric treatment. His difficulties unfolded alongside substance use, professional setbacks, arrests, homelessness, and intense public scrutiny. The original transcript goes much further, claiming schizophrenia and describing specific auditory and visual hallucinations as established medical facts. Without stronger documentation, those claims should not be repeated as confirmed diagnoses. One of Hamilton's darkest periods came after his early breakthrough collapsed. He disappeared from the mainstream spotlight and spent time receiving treatment, while the extraordinary output that once made him an internet phenomenon became increasingly overshadowed by concerns about his well-being. But his story did not end there. Hamilton eventually returned to music and in 2015 released New York Raining with Rita Ora, demonstrating that the creativity audiences first recognized had survived years of turmoil. He has continued releasing independent material rather than recreating the exact career trajectory once predicted for him. That makes Hamilton's journey more meaningful than a conventional rise and fall narrative. Mental illness did not erase his talent, and commercial decline did not erase his humanity. Charles Hamilton was once treated as hip-hop's next great prodigy. His later story became about something more fundamental than fame, staying alive, finding stability, and continuing to create when the industry had already moved on. Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar has spent much of his career examining subjects that many rappers once avoided: guilt, trauma, insecurity, addiction, family wounds, faith, and the psychological consequences of surviving violence. Growing up in Compton, Kendrick witnessed realities that later became central to his storytelling. Yet his music also revealed something less visible: the emotional burden carried by the person who escaped while others did not. That tension reached extraordinary depth onto Pimp a Butterfly in 2015. Songs such as You confronted self-loathing, depression, guilt, and isolation with startling intensity. Kendrick has also discussed experiencing depression and survivor's guilt, particularly in relation to friends and people from his community whose lives followed very different paths. The original transcript correctly recognizes survivor's guilt as an important theme, but goes too far by presenting a formal diagnosis of clinical depression as established fact. Kendrick's lyrics can illuminate his emotional experiences, but they should never be treated as psychiatric records. Years later, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers pushed that vulnerability further. Released in 2022, the album explored therapy, generational trauma, grief, relationships, accountability, and the uncomfortable process of examining wounds rather than disguising them. That evolution matters. Kendrick became one of hip-hop's most decorated artists, eventually earning the Pulitzer Prize for Music for Damn. In 2018, the first rapper to receive the honor. Yet achievement did not prevent him from exploring emotional pain. His story therefore avoids an easy conclusion. Kendrick never needed a dramatic public breakdown for his struggle to deserve attention. His greatest contribution to mental health conversations may be showing that trauma can survive success and that confronting what hurts can require more courage than pretending nothing hurts at all. Pharoahe Monch. Behind the extraordinary technical precision of Pharoahe Monch lies a story considerably more vulnerable than his reputation as an elite lyricist might suggest. Born Troy Donald, Jamerson, the Queen's rapper, first gained recognition as one half of Organized Confusion alongside Prince Poe before establishing a respected solo career. His verbal complexity earned admiration from generations of MCs, but away from the microphone, Monch faced a prolonged struggle with depression. Unlike cases where a mental health narrative has been constructed primarily from lyrics, Monch has personally discussed depression and suicidal thoughts. That makes his inclusion particularly relevant. The original transcript, despite repeatedly misspelling his stage name as Pharaoh Monch, correctly identifies depression as an important part of his experience. His struggles also intersected with physical illness. Monch has lived with asthma, and he has described how treatment involving corticosteroids contributed to difficult psychological side effects. During particularly severe periods, depression and suicidal ideation became frightening realities rather than abstract artistic themes. Those experiences informed his 2014 album PTSD Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. Instead of simply using the title as provocative imagery, Monch built an intensely personal concept around trauma medication, survival fear, and psychological conflict. His willingness to discuss those subjects was significant. Hip-hop traditionally rewarded displays of control and invulnerability. Monch exposed what could happen when control disappeared internally, even while an artist continued functioning professionally. He survived those periods and continued creating, later joining Styles P and Marco Polo in the group Tewar Trien. Perhaps that survival is the most important part. Pharaoh Monch spent his career mastering extraordinarily complicated rhymes, but one of his hardest battles could not be solved through technique. By speaking about depression rather than disguising it, he turned survival itself into another form of testimony. Isaiah Rashad. When Isaiah Rashad joined Top Dog Entertainment, he appeared to have found the opportunity capable of transforming his life. The Chattanooga, Tennessee rapper earned acclaim for the introspection of Sylvia Demo in 2014 and later The Sun's Tirade. But between releases, audiences began noticing long periods of silence. Behind those absences was a struggle far more complicated than writer's block. Rashad has spoken candidly about depression, anxiety, addiction, and substance abuse, including periods when alcohol and prescription drugs were damaging his health, finances, relationships, and ability to work. His struggles became serious enough that his promising career was placed in jeopardy. The original transcript connects those years to panic alcoholism, sedative abuse, and financial problems. However, its claim that he approached organ failure should not be presented as confirmed without stronger evidence. Rashad's own accounts already provide enough material without amplifying the story. At his lowest points, he has described being nearly broke despite having a respected recording career. Instead of producing the steady stream of releases expected from a rising rapper, he was struggling simply to regain stability. His eventual return carried therefore greater significance. The House is Burning, released in 2021 after a 5-year gap between albums, represented more than another commercial project. It arrived after years spent confronting destructive habits and rebuilding his life. Rashad's story is particularly powerful because addiction and depression did not always appear publicly dramatic. From the outside, fans mostly saw silence. Behind it, a young artist was fighting to keep his career and himself from disappearing. Isaiah Rashad eventually returned to the microphone, but his most important comeback happened before anyone heard a new song. He began rebuilding the person who still had to exist when the music stopped. Polo G. Behind the melodic hooks and polished success of Polo G lies a story shaped by grief, anxiety, substance use, and repeated exposure to loss. Born Taurus, Tremonti Bartlett in Chicago, Polo grew up surrounded by the consequences of neighborhood violence. When his career exploded through songs such as Finer Things, Pop Out, and later the chart-topping Rapstar, financial circumstances changed dramatically, but painful memories did not simply disappear. Polo has publicly discussed experiencing depression and anxiety, particularly during periods of intense personal loss. His music frequently examines death, survivor's guilt, emotional numbness, and the fear of losing more people around him. The original transcript also attributes PTSD and recurring nightmares to him. Those stronger diagnostic claims should be treated carefully unless supported by Polo's own documented statements or medical confirmation. Substance use became another serious part of his story. Polo has spoken about using prescription pills and acknowledged the dangers associated with that lifestyle. In 2019, he experienced a frightening medical emergency after excessive drug use, an episode he later described as an important warning. His subsequent success was extraordinary. A legend established him nationally, the GOAT expanded his audience, and rap star reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 2021. Yet numbers reveal only half the journey. Some of Polo's most resonant records come from turning grief into language listeners recognize in themselves. That distinction matters. His pain should not be romanticized as the secret behind his talent. Polo G escaped many circumstances that shaped his childhood, but emotional survival proved to be another battle entirely. His music became a place where grief could finally speak and where millions of listeners realized they were not carrying theirs alone. Earl Sweatshirt, Thebe Neruda, Kego Sitsile. When Earl Sweatshirt first appeared alongside Tyler the Creator and Odd Future, listeners immediately recognized something unusual. Born Thebe Neruda, Kego Sitsile Earl possessed remarkably intricate writing skills while still a teenager. His 2010 mixtape, Earl, generated enormous attention, but beneath the image of a young lyrical prodigy was someone whose relationship with fame would become increasingly complicated. Earl's adolescence included a period at a therapeutic boarding school in Samoa. After returning to the United States and resuming his career, his music became progressively introspective, exploring isolation, grief, substance use, family relationships, and depression. The source transcript identifies depression and severe anxiety as central to his difficulties and links those struggles to withdrawal and social isolation. However, its claim that he was formally diagnosed early should not be presented as established medical fact without stronger documentation. Earl's own discussions and artistic work provide a safer basis for describing his emotional struggles. His 2015 album, I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, captured that claustrophobic period with remarkable directness. Later, the death of his father, acclaimed South African poet Keora Petse Kego Sitsile, in 2018, added another layer of grief. Some rap songs, released later that year, became a fragmented and deeply personal exploration of mourning and emotional exhaustion, instead of chasing conventional superstardom. Earl gradually built a quieter career around experimentation and creative independence. That decision gives his journey unusual meaning. Success for Earl did not require becoming hip-hop's loudest personality. The teenage prodigy, once surrounded by enormous expectations, eventually discovered another measure of survival, protecting his inner world, accepting grief, and making art without allowing fame to consume the person creating it. Bushwick Bill, Richard Stephen Shaw. Few images in hip-hop history are as unforgettable as Bushwick Bill staring from the cover of the Ghetto Boys 1991 album We Can't Be Stopped, injured and missing an eye. Born Richard Stephen Shaw in Jamaica, Bill became an essential member of the Houston group whose disturbing storytelling helped establish Southern hip-hop nationally. Behind that shocking image, however, was a real night of alcohol, emotional crisis, violence, and permanent consequences. In 1991, during an intoxicated and highly unstable episode, Bill became involved in a confrontation with his girlfriend that ended when a firearm discharged, striking him in the right eye. He survived but permanently lost the eye. The notorious hospital photograph taken afterward became the album cover. The original transcript frames the incident as the direct product of diagnosed depression, paranoia, psychosis, and suicidal impulses. Bill himself later discussed wanting to die during the episode, but assigning every specific psychiatric diagnosis or symptom in the transcript goes beyond what should be claimed without reliable medical evidence. What Bill openly described about that night is already disturbing enough. His story involved heavy drinking and a profound personal crisis, not a theatrical scene created for an album campaign. Surviving the shooting changed him physically and eventually contributed to deeper reflection. Later in life, Bill increasingly discussed spirituality and Christianity while continuing to perform. In 2009, he revealed that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Bushwick Bill died on June 9th that year at age 52. His legacy therefore contains a striking contradiction. He survived the incident that produced one of rap's most disturbing photographs, only to face a completely different battle decades later. Behind the legendary album cover was never merely shock value. There was a human being who survived an extraordinarily dark night and carried its visible reminder for the rest of his life. Bizzy Bone Brian Anthony McCain. Why? Before Bizzy Bone ever experienced fame, his life had already contained trauma almost unimaginable for a child. Born Brian Anthony McCain II, the future Bone Thugs and Harmony member, was abducted as a young boy by his mother's boyfriend and remained separated from his mother for an extended period. His eventual recovery became part of an extraordinary childhood story that followed him long before millions knew his voice. Years later, Bizzy joined Bone Thugs and Harmony, whose melodic rapid-fire delivery created one of the most distinctive sounds of 1990s hip-hop. The group achieved enormous success with songs including The Crossroads, which won a Grammy Award in 1997. Yet Bizzy's behavior occasionally generated concern and controversy. The original transcript connects his childhood abduction directly to severe PTSD, schizophrenia, hallucinations, paranoia, homelessness, and substance abuse. This is precisely where a responsible remake needs restraint. Childhood trauma is documented, but we should not transform unusual public behavior into specific psychiatric diagnoses without reliable evidence that Bizzy received or disclosed those diagnoses himself. What can be said confidently is that his early experiences were deeply traumatic and that he has spoken publicly about the abduction and its lasting significance. Music and spirituality subsequently became important elements of his identity. His story also demonstrates why mental health narratives about celebrities can become misleading. An eccentric interview, an emotional performance, or unconventional religious belief is not automatically evidence of psychosis. Today, Bizzy remains associated with the extraordinary legacy of Bone Thugs and Harmony while continuing his own creative path. The most powerful part of his story does not require an invented diagnosis. Bizzy survived a childhood stolen from him, found a voice unlike anyone else's, and turned that voice into a career that endured for decades. These 19 stories reveal something hip-hop once struggled to say out loud. Strength and emotional suffering can exist in the same person. From Kid Cudi and Kanye West to DMX, Scarface, Big Sean and G Herbo. These artists faced different battles involving depression, anxiety, trauma, addiction, or other documented mental health struggles. Some sought professional help, others transformed their pain into music, and a few never lived to see brighter chapters. But their experiences leave us with a difficult question. Does the music industry do enough to protect artists struggling with their mental health, or does fame make their problems even worse? Share your opinion in the comments and tell us which story affected you most. Like this video and subscribe to Golden Black Legends for more powerful stories behind the legends.